All right, hello again. For this video, we're going to talk a little bit about how we would go from sort of that line work to sort of filling things in. And obviously, we're gonna talk about things a couple different ways. We'll talk about things first with regard to 3D, and then we'll talk about them with regard to 2D. So if you're going with a 2D approach, go ahead and skip forward in the video. We're just going to take a couple of minutes here and talk about the 3D approach first. So I'm not setting up any real lighting in the scene here yet, but I am setting up some possibilities for my camera, right? One of the advantages of using 3D is that not only, by the way, if you are a concept artist at an actual studio, the 3D gives obviously 3D artists quite a nice basis to model from. It's also very helpful if you're using outsourcers because you can show outsourcers, specifically what you're thinking of in terms of your model. Now, with regard to the 3D stuff, what I would just say that is the most important when you're setting up your 3D scene is that you put the most detail into where you think your camera is going to be, right? So if I have my camera anywhere in this area here, the most important thing is that this street corner or this corner over here will get the most detail, right? So I'm going to basically focus most of my attention in terms of detail on this particular intersection. As I go back further in the scene, I mean, you may see some more detail, but it's really just out of it's really just out of laziness, right? Not coming up with a new building. So it's perfectly fine to do that. But once we start getting back into these other buildings over here, you'll notice that all of the detail pretty much completely goes away, right? It's just all basic primitives. And that's okay because we're not going to see the detail that's that far away. So even if we bring up our camera up close here, we can definitely distinguish between the foreground and the background, even though it's a 3D model. One other thing that I would mention too, I think that's kind of important, is when you build your 3D scene, if this is the way that you choose to do it, I'd recommend building it on a curved, like a cylindrical or a circular surface, like it's a big tray, kind of like this. And the reason it has to do with the horizon line, right? This is a little bit more accurate to what you would see with a horizon line if you were looking through a lens, right? The lens would bend the horizon line as you look out. And if you were to use a squared surface, you will see those squared ends in the background, and you'll have to probably paint over them in Photoshop. So this will save you a step, and it'll look a little bit more natural when you do your render. All right. So with that said, let's move onto 2D. So one thing that I mentioned last week, or for the last video, I suppose, is if you're going to do all of your perspective work in Photoshop, the best thing that you can do really is kind of set up your whole scene orthographically, right? So one of the things that I'd recommend doing is start with a template, have just some lines, right? So, and have a little figure so that you know how high a figure is going to be, how high a door is going to be, how high a floor is going to be. I'll just go ahead and up the opacity on this. And then you can see floor 1, 2, 3, 4. And I mean, think of it just like a piece of lined paper, right? One of the advantages of doing this is that you can set up your entire buildings, and you'll know that they are going to be the correct size, right? Now, as far as your buildings are concerned, you're also going to want to set up every side orthographically, or at least every major side orthographically, right? So here I've got two buildings. So these two buildings are going to be the focal point of my piece. So I've just made them together, side by side. And then what I did was there's going to be another face to this building. I'm going to do a 2-point perspective piece. So I'm going to move that building off to the side, and really what I would do is I would just make the other side of that building right next to it, right? So that I know that all of the floors line up, I know that all the windows line up, I know that everything's going to be the right size. And you would do this with every single element in the scene. So if it's a road, you'd plan out your road flat, and you would do your sidewalks with it, you would do all of your line work with it, right? If you want to add in any sort of street painting or detail, or maybe you want to add in things like sewer grates, right? You could do that off to the side. Maybe you want to add in tree planters on the sidewalk, right? You would sort of figure out where you would want those. Oop. Let's go ahead and, yeah, there we go. And then you would put those in. Any sorts of signs, stop signs, street signs, street lamps, even your windows. Just do a bunch of different windows. Basically, I mean, it's very similar to 3D in that you're sort of just making your own little Lego set and planning it out flat. One of the problems with doing this, though, that can be a little frustrating in Photoshop is like you have a lot of these flat things, and then if you're trying to create a scene on top of all of this, like some of that stuff can get lost. So number one, when you make all of this stuff, one thing that's really important to do is make sure that you name it so that you can find it fairly easily. Don't forget that you can also left click on these and add colors. So if you want to find windows really quickly or your template really quickly, you can do that. But one other thing that you can also do, one other power that Photoshop has, and I want you to be a little cautious with this because this is a little heavy on your computer performance. One other thing that you can do is use what are called artboards. Now, how do you do this? Now, this particular scene is already set up with artboards, but what you would basically do, if you didn't have your scene set up for artboards, is you could put basically just select all of your layers, and then go into layer, new, and then artboard from layers would be what you would select. And then what you would end up with is basically something like this that would have a little label off to the side, and you'd sort of see this white line around the outside. So you can name your artboard whatever you want. I'm just going to call this one Forge because this is where I'm building all of my stuff for my buildings. But then if I wanted, one thing that I could do with my Forge is with my Move tool, I can go to my Artboard tool, and then holding down the Alt key, I could left mouse click, shift and drag, and I can create a whole new artboard right off to the side. And from there, I could take all of those elements and put them together. So if I wanted to add in things like street lamps or something later, things that might get lost, I could do that. Now, what I've done is I've actually already created another scene over here with some of that. So a couple of things. First of all, when I did my roads, I made the full intersection of the roads, and then I basically put those in first. I will show you how I did that. Right. So the first thing that I always put in are my roads and walks. The reason why I do that is because I know from my Forge over here, I know how big my road is, and I know how big that is compared to my buildings. I know how big my sidewalk squares are going to be. So that basically acts as a scale marker of sorts, right? Oh, we'll get to that in a minute. So then I go ahead and then I would just do control, or I would go to edit, transform, distort on each one of the layers that I wanted to add. All right, always add your windows in first. I'm missing a wall over here, but this is so small, I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so yeah, once you have another artboard set up, and again, you don't have to do this on another artboard, but if you do have another artboard set up, it's pretty nice because you can just drag the stuff that you want from one artboard to the other. That can be very, very helpful. Again, you just want to be careful because the file size will get very, very large if you continue to add artboards, and especially once you start adding in color and blending layers and stuff like that. It can be a very big file size, and it can really, really slow your computer down. Okay, so we have all of our imagery distorted in. We have all of the whole scene is set up. It looks, generally speaking, roughly correct in terms of perspective. This looks fine. It's, again, probably not perfect, but to my eye at least, it looks generally okay. Right? So what we're going to do now is we're not going to worry about the whole entire scene. Usually what I'll do is I'll create a little vignette. Basically, I'll take my, I'll make a new layer. I will grab my marquee tool, and I'll just sort of find a composition that I like. I'll do select inverse. I'll grab my paint bucket tool, grab some black, and just drop it in. And then I can sort of see, I can sort of focus exactly on the parts that I'm going to need to worry about. Right? So here's my vignette that I've dropped in. Now what are we going to do? Well, the key to this part of the assignment is just to make sure that you start getting all of your fills in for this part of the assignment. So what I would recommend doing is, go well behind your line work. And the first thing that I'd recommend doing is just dropping in, use your fill tool, drop in sort of a 50% gray background. And make sure that you do this on top of your background. You want an extra background just in case you need to sort of select everything. Then do a layer over that. And then you're going to start using, what I recommend using is your polygonal lasso tool right here. And what you're going to do is you're just going to just grab the edges. You're just going to click on the edges. Again, this is all on a new layer. If you mess up like that, just hold the shift button down. You'll see that your lasso tool comes up with a plus. And you continue to click through there. Again, this doesn't have to be totally perfect. There we go. And now I'm going to pick a slightly darker shade of gray. And let's do the same thing for this building over here. And I'm just going to eyeball. Ooh, I want to give a little bit of room for an alley there. And there we go. Drop in some more gray over there. All right, so this looks pretty flat and boring. But what we can do now that we have these buildings, right, is we can start painting up the sides. So one thing that I might do, let's grab my AAA drawer here. I can select all of that. Let's do another layer above it. Let's go to the 50% gray. Let's pick a lighter gray color. Okay. Now, what I'll do, and again, you can sort of just use your mouse to click your way through this to keep those lines nice and straight. What we're doing here is we're just picking the sides that are going to see sunlight, just like that. Okay. And basically, you know, that's what we'll do. For every major part of this, you know, like windows, for example, you're going to sort of click through, and you'll make windows. Now, windows typically, unless it's an evening scene, windows are typically darker, not lighter than the rest of the building, because the interior of the building is dark, right? So you're going to want to make those darker. Now, eventually, later, we'll go back and we'll light these so that they look appropriate. But we're not going to worry about that right now. We're just going to get these details figured out. And the reason that we want to do just all of our windows together, we'll get to that when we start doing lighting, but we definitely want all of our windows on the same layer. At least make sure that your windows are on a separate layer. If you are so inclined, might even be a better practice to ensure that all of your windows on a particular side of the building are on the same layer together. You don't have to do that, but I would advise that you do. Again, that has more to do with lighting, and we'll talk about that a little bit next time in our next video. Right. So eventually, you'll go through all of these windows. You'll go through the sidewalks, perhaps billboards. You'll go through any sort of markings on the street, and you will want to have layers for all of those things. So I've gone ahead and done that already. I've got sort of a background for all of my buildings. I've added in sidewalks. I've got windows. I've got my billboard. And then once you've got this much done, what you want to do is start putting in a few details. Again, don't spend a ton of time on the details, but maybe just start putting some different things in. So in this particular case, right, I've got these little planters here, so I've added in trees. And it's the same tree. I've just taken it and squashed it a little bit, changed some of the lighting on some of this stuff so it stands out a little bit more against the background over here. But those are all set. And then I've gone ahead and I've added in streetlights. And even though I planned these out flat, I've made sure that when I distorted them into the scene, that they go with the corresponding directions of our lines. Remember, we always have to keep an eye on our perspective, right? Where are our perspective lines? You know, we always want to make sure that we have an eye on them. So just to call them out again, you know, and you can do this as a separate layer if you want in your own scene. But like, there's a perspective line, there's a perspective line, right? You want to make sure that like everything lines up properly, right? And you know, in a 2-point perspective, these lines are going in different directions. So if your stuff starts or stops at a particular edge of something else in your scene, you want to make sure that it is correctly aligned with that perspective. One other thing that I did do is I've also added in background buildings and a little bit of sky And it's just kind of for flavor, right? Now the deal is that you have to have 4 buildings in the scene, but they don't have to be 4 fully rendered buildings, right? So if I go into my background layer here and I magic lasso this background, one tool that I recommend using is the zero block in your tool presets. This is a good building brush. So I'll just take like a darker color here, scale up my brush, right? You can put something in, right? That's a little too dark. Let's lighten it up. That actually looks okay, right? So you can add in buildings just like the 3D where you're just kind of adding in shapes. Yeah, that's kind of what you're doing here. The other thing that you can do is add in just a little bit of flavor for the sky. So if you go to your airbrush soft, you pick maybe a darker color. Remember, as you look up into the sky, usually that hue darkens a little bit because you're looking up towards space. Down below, you might have a little bit more light, right? So here we go. We've got sky in, and then we've got buildings in the background. And this is about where you'd want to be. From here, next time we'll look at how to light the scene properly and add a little bit of visual interest. Again, I'm just keeping this scene very, very simple. This is kind of a boring scene, but this is really just to show you how to do all this stuff. So we'll stop there, and next time we'll look at lighting. Thanks for your attention.